Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
The left versus the right. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. It's the left versus the right. It's David Paterson in studio. And James Flippin knows that I have so much material that will outrank anything that he says that he didn't even come into the studio today. We have him on the phone. Are you there, James?
Yeah, Governor, I'd like to blame the inclement weather, but it's actually just my deep knowledge of your outstanding prep and the fact that, anything I might try to bring to the table would just be dwarfed.
Absolutely. So first of all, I want to hope that your Christmas and the rest of the weekend has been merry like most of us. And Christmas was kind of a special day, James, because it's the day that we bombed a lot of the terror sites that were erected in Nigeria, and it was well organized because of the cooperation of the Nigerian government along with our administration. And if that didn't send a message, not just to Nigeria, but other parts of Africa and really the whole world, that we're not going to sit by and let friends of ours be killed, Christians being killed on Christmas, which is one of the reasons the president decided to attack the terrorists on Christmas, I would say that we're getting off to a good start.
Yeah, well, Governor, I share and echo that sentiment that I hope you and yours had a great Christmas. Hopefully you and Mary and Anthony had a great day and some time to, kind of relax and celebrate the birth of Jesus and all that the season brings. But I do have to say it was a little bit bittersweet in a way, the fact that you almost felt some level of retribution or maybe vengeance at the end of that with what you're referring to, the airstrikes that were launched against the ISIS terrorists on Christmas. And absolutely it had to happen. Absolutely, it's the kind of thing that for too long has been happening to the Christians of the world, being mistreated, being abused, and no one doing anything about it. President Trump had warned the terrorists there that wasn't going to be tolerated. And then in quite symbolic fashion, obviously, did so on Christmas. But yeah, in terms of the other aspects of that, it's been a great Christmas for me. I mean, we had a really nice gathering on Thursday, and then yesterday I was actually filling in for Sid with John Katsimatidis during Sid and Friends in the Morning. President Trump called in because he wanted to discuss that attack on the Nigerian terrorists. So here I am, Christmas. Talked to President Trump on Friday, and on Saturday I'm co-hosting a show with New York Governor David Paterson. So you could do a lot worse.
Not bad. So our Christmas was very interesting. Mary and Anthony and I, particularly Mary and I, had been to so many holiday events that we just wanted to just relax on Christmas and, have dinner together and that kind of thing. But at one point, I went down the hall to, put some garbage out. And when I was walking back, I heard a lot of voices in our neighbor's apartment. His door is about 30 feet down from ours. So I went down and told Mary, and Mary said, well, why don't we offer him a bottle of red wine for Christmas? So instead of ringing his bell and giving him the wine, I put the wine in front of the door, knocked on the door, and went and hid further down the hall. So he came out, and when he saw the red wine and he's yelling in the hall, who did this? It didn't take him long to figure out there's only one person in the hall who would act this way. And the penalty for this is that he wanted us to come have dinner with him. And we had a wonderful time with him and his friends. Speaking of Mary, by the way, James, she's actually here today with me. She drove me down here through the snow today, or whatever you'd call that.
Oh, very, very nice. Oh, well, beautiful. Well, hello, time. Mary. And yeah, that's great. It's a family affair here on the left versus the right, which is a good thing. But Yeah, no, that's awesome, Governor Paterson. You know, I really love to hear that kind of stuff. That's so in line with the spirit of the season, as they say. And for a second, I thought he was just going to say, your neighbor, honey, Santa sent wine, and then just kind of slid into the door closed. And
President Trump put out he spoke today on one of the wire services, and he's saying that the way the economy is going, this is going to be a big year, that the tariffs are creating all types of opportunities. He quoted some of the sources from where his information came, where he was able to discuss it. And all of them seem to feel that the economy is very much on the rise. The United States Information Service didn't exactly follow where the president was, but you'd have to say it was very positive outlook on what next year could be for the citizens of the United States.
Well, that's good news. And obviously, I agree with President Trump. I think that the sort of shock that the system went through and that the economy experienced, specifically really the stock market, in terms of what the president did early this year, putting into place the tariffs, the way that the investment community reacted to that, the fear that was so prevalent on Wall Street has really started to pull away. You've heard so much about all the investment that these companies have made into the U.S. because they realize that playing up against those tax levies and tariffs is going to be a losing proposition. You also have all the revenue that's been generated by these tariffs. So when I was talking with this about 24 hours ago, maybe more than that, obviously, with John on Friday, hosting for Sid, it was like, well, what about the Supreme Court ruling that we're waiting on in terms of overturning these tariffs? That's the only thing that has me a little bit sort of concerned, I guess, as we move forward. Most of the time, I think you can count on the Supreme Court's conservative majority to do the right thing with something like this. But I don't know. I don't understand the legality behind it. I have no idea why the president wouldn't be able to impose tariffs. I always thought from my fifth grade social studies class that was something that the president was able to do. But I think that there's so much optimism about what's coming. The show previous to ours, Governor Paterson, they were talking about the IPO for SpaceX that could happen here in 2026 and how much optimism there is about AI and robotics and space exploration. It's almost like we're entering a new age in terms of that growth. And that's obviously a good thing for the U.S. economy.
It almost reminds me of the economic growth after World War II and how we as Americans jumped out really in front of everyone else. And by, say, 1960, we were the experts on just about everything when it came to economics or machinery or, exactly the right way to pump oil and the whole thing. Now, I want to ease your frustrations about the Supreme Court, James, but I actually feel the same way you do. I'm not even really sure what the violation would be that would cause the court to strike down the efforts that have been made over the past month or two.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know the true ins and outs of it in terms of the legality. I mean, the U.S. Constitution has pretty explicit powers defined when it comes to the ability to levy tariffs. I guess the claim is that it has to be done by Congress as opposed to the president. I mean, again, like I said, I'm going to have to dust off my social studies book because I thought that did sort of lie with the executive branch. But I could be wrong. And I think that that's where some of this stuff is going to have to play itself out. But there are certain things happening right now, Governor, and I definitely want to spend a decent amount of time on it today, that tie to the economy in their own way and cannot be forgiven, cannot be argued in the Supreme Court, that kind of thing. Not sure if you saw this, Governor, but it's going massively viral on social media. This young man by the name of Nick Shirley, and he's one of these, you're probably familiar with like James O'Keefe, Governor Paterson. Yeah, he's the guy who does those sort of undercover videos where he'll put a disguise on, where they'll like Groucho Marx glasses and a nose and then kind of trick some staffer into giving away the keys to the kingdom in terms of what's going on behind closed doors. Well, this guy, Nick Shirley, not even in a disguise, he went up to these daycare centers in Minneapolis, which are being run by mostly Somali immigrants, and discovering that these places are entirely empty, totally empty. There are places that are taking in millions of dollars a year to be caring for kids. For example, there's this one place that he looked at, receives $4 million a year and supposedly cares for 99 children, this daycare center. No children when they went there to this daycare center. Nobody there except for some women in traditionally Somali clothing. So there's a lot that needs to be done in terms of like taking care of our own house. And you saw the pushback on Doge. You saw the pushback on USAID. We understand some of the issues that we've had with election integrity and stuff like that. But I think that the worm is starting to turn in terms of how much the public cares and knows about some of this stuff that goes on in government and all the waste and the fraud and the abuse that we've been talking about for a long time.
Well, I'm familiar with this situation, and you would think that there'd be one person, either an employee or the relative of who they were treating in these centers, would come forward and talk to the attorney general of the state or their local elected official. You would think that somebody would do that, realizing how much money is being poured right out of our economy into the hands of people we don't even know.
Yeah, well, you would think that. I think that there's a few different things that come to mind, Governor Paterson, and this is something that, I'd love for you to kind of touch on because you're somebody who knows so much about not just politics, but the people involved and maybe kind of what their backstories are. And obviously no one person is the same, and no two people are the same, I should say. And everybody's got their own story to tell. But it really speaks to me that a random, to this point, sort of not as well-known independent journalist who goes out there with a video camera and his assistant and they start doing the work on the ground, that's the person that's now going viral on social media with these, millions of views in just 24 hours. No mainstream reporting, no Washington Post, no New York Times, no Wall Street Journal. It's just this guy who's out there uncovering this kind of stuff. It really, to me, says, okay, there is nobody in power that really actually cares. There is nobody in power who's really actually going to do the work that it takes to overcome some of this stuff, maybe because they're making money off of it. Well, I think that a guy like Tim Walz needs to be looked at very closely. You mentioned the Attorney General, Governor Paterson. Well, hey, if somebody took this to Keith Ellison, he would say, why don't you run along? I'll take care of this. Because he certainly doesn't want any accountability either. Keith Ellison and Tim Walz are one and the same. They're Democratic operatives. They're total extremists. Well, and they would do anything, James, including selling their state down the river to get their political.
We're going to take a little break here and hear from our sponsors. When we come back, I have a surprising revelation I'd like to make to you.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The left versus the right. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We are back with the left versus the right, and I have promised my partner doing this show, as we do from time to time on Saturday afternoons, that I have a revelation for him. Are you ready, James?
I am waiting with bated breath, Governor Paterson.
When you were speaking, I cringed because when I said they should take it to some of the authorities, go to the Attorney General, I wasn't thinking about Minnesota. I was just thinking that would be the governmental respondent, because if I had realized who the Attorney General was, believe me, I would not have mentioned his name.
Well, I think, Governor Paterson, that you ought to be forgiven, because the normal person, the well-adjusted person, would think, oh, well, this is certainly the kind of thing that should go to the state's top prosecutor.
Right.
The problem is depending on what state you're in, and that's true of New York, sadly, that prosecutor is actually more so a officer of the political spectrum rather than an officer of the court. And so Keith Ellison is certainly not going to want any crackdown on Somali immigrant fraud, because the Somali immigrants do a lot of ballot harvesting in exchange for that funding, let's say, in exchange for all that stuff. So, yeah, it's my point is to say that I think we absolutely need to be talking about and focusing on all this stuff. Tim Walz, talk about a guy who, wow, this is the guy who was almost the vice president of the United States, and he was this close, and now he's got politicians getting assassinated in his state. There's this massive fraud. Let's not forget how Minneapolis was totally hollowed out and burned out during the George Floyd rage. So this whole thing is just really, really being exposed in a big way. And I think this is the other thing I'll say, Governor Paterson, the Minneapolis fraud and all that's being exposed there. That's why the left fought so hard against DOJ and so hard against audits and so hard against reform. The anger about Venezuela that's largely performative. That's because of the fraud that can happen through a country like Venezuela and USAID. The Ukraine war with Russia, that virtue signaling, we have to send so much money to them. That's also part of the USAID fraud. So on and on and on. There's a lot of fraud and a lot of accountability that needs to be brought to where all this taxpayer money is being spent.
Well, James, right here in New York State, I'm involved in a case right now, and I'm not going to name any names, but I'm just going to tell you what happened. There's an individual who was employed by New York State going back, I think, to around like the early 80s. So he's easily, has come up on 40 years of service. And he was in an agency. He was asked to run different agencies that if I said them, you would know what agency it is, and then you would consequently know who he is. But he was asked to run some of these agencies. And then he was moved to a different part of the service, whereupon he became familiar with a lot of numbers that didn't add up, documents that disappeared, people who were missing from the job and came back a month later. Nobody did anything about it. And so what he did, at this point, he was now working for a company that had an affiliation with the state. He went to the management and he explained to them everything that was happening. And they called him back the next week and they told him, we looked into it and everything is fine. Well, at that point, he decided to write down everything that he saw, and he sent that in, and they wrote back to him, we told you that we looked into it. We don't find any impropriety. 15 days after that, he was fired. 37 years of work to the state and to the private sector, he was fired. And so now he has sued the actual company. And when I heard about it, I went to the Attorney General of this state, Letitia James, to explain what this is about. And my understanding is that they are seriously looking into this situation, that this might be a matter of billions of dollars that has been wasted over the past 15 to 20 years.
Well, I wish that I could say that it was surprising to me to hear about that kind of thing. I know that there's always these kind of one-offs in the news that we hear about. Obviously, that's something I pay close attention to, being the news director for 77 WABC. And a few years ago, there was a big OT scandal exposed with the LIRR
and
engineers.
The transportation issue, yeah.
Yeah, and then about all the funding problems that agency's had, and it's like, wow, well, how is the money actually being spent? But I think this is in an overarching way also why the conservative tends to be so anti-government, right? It's sometimes just kind of understood that these are where these positions come from in the political spectrum. But really, why? And And part of it is that you don't believe in the efficiency of government, or that that's not the right way to do things, and it's actually not going to work out as well. And you could argue about that till you're blue in the face, because there's plenty of downside within the private sector. And, capitalism's not perfect all the time and whatever. But private companies go out of business, right? That's the ultimate prize. That's the ultimate payment that they have to face. That's the ultimate penalty. Executives with those private companies lose a lot of money, or potentially could get indicted for something like fraud or wire fraud and abuse and misrepresentation and inside trading and stuff like that. The amount to which that stuff is happening in the public sector and how much money we're talking about here, it's really significant. So you need to have some level of ability to actually push back against and crack down on all that waste, fraud, and abuse. And you saw it from a guy like Elon Musk and his whole Doge team, the amount of progress they were able to make doing that in just a short amount of time. With the federal government, I don't know what we have to do to have that happen on a broader scale for a state like New York or for a state like New Jersey, but it's absolutely necessary. And you could even start with something like the MTA and actually put together a full wide-scale audit and try to figure out what's going on with this whole thing. And the lawmakers in Albany just outright refuse to do it. All I can say is, why? And when you look at what we're talking about, all the millions of dollars in fraud that's taking place, you have your answer. You know the answer. It's follow the money, and that's really what it's all about. As
the owner and operator, John Catsimatidis, would say, understood.
That's not always the best. I have to say, Governor Paterson, that's not always my favorite text to get from John Catsimatidis, by the way.
I see.
Because I don't know if he's saying it in a sort of happy and satisfied and understanding way, or if it's sort of like the way my father might text understood to me if he was not necessarily so pleased.
Exactly.
So
now,
you do have to try to interpret the understood sometimes.
Now, speaking of John Catsimatidis, and I know you did the morning show with him on Friday morning, and I believe John has been on the air since late November, I believe. And but my question,
well, he does step off. No, but Governor Paterson, that's not entirely true, because every now and then he'll step away from the microphone to get a cup of coffee, or maybe he's got to use the restroom quickly, or take a phone call and do a business meeting. But yeah, he has actually been on the air more or less consistently since Thanksgiving, I think.
It's just amazing. It really is. But how did you like? It's Saturday afternoon. We're discussing some serious subjects, but how did you like seeing our friend and our boss as he appeared in the movie Marty Supreme?
I enjoyed it a lot. I mean, I think that guy, Josh Safdie, makes a good film. I think that he's a guy who probably similar in age to me, kind of grew up with similar inspirations. I read a review of the movie after the fact that was kind of comparing it in some ways to like a Rocky type thing, like kind of the underdog rising up and getting his chance. John was a natural in it. I mean, I think that the cool thing about acting, and I've not done much of it outside of like years ago when I was in school plays and stuff like that, is that there are a lot of similarities to other things you might do in life, depending on if you do that, whatever. Let's say holding a business meeting, making a pitch, interviewing somebody for a job, getting to know somebody for the first time that could eventually be a business partner or a business contact, speaking to somebody on the phone, hosting a radio show, right? I was talking with John about that, and he agreed in the sense that he said it's kind of like all that stuff, but then you also have to kind of make believe, right? Like you kind of have to pretend a little bit. And you do that at times in these other aspects of life, but I think you have to really lean into it. And he said that he enjoyed it. I enjoyed watching the finished product too, because in the trailer, when you see John sitting there at his desk, and he's got the suspenders on, and he's got his serious face on, kind of the furrowed brow, because he's focusing on what's being said. It's like, oh, I've seen that guy before. I know him in that moment. I know what he's like. So he kind of agreed with that, I think, in the sense that you find ways to draw on your personal experiences and then also kind of pretend to be whoever this character is supposed to be based off the script.
Well, my moment in the movie was when the friends of his son, they were trying to convince him that there was something else that his son could do. And he had told them he wanted a cup of coffee. And then they're still talking. Yes. He asked a second time, and then he screamed, "Where's the coffee?" And I thought, now that I've heard that voice before, but it was really,
yes,
it was really, it was quite an appearance. And I must say that other than my appearance on Saturday Night Live in 2010, the only other acting I did was in the 6th grade when we had a play called the Miss Frankenstein contest. We were making fun of the Academy Awards. And I was the monster of ceremony in the play. So it was pretty good. But getting back to some of the things that you said before, I'm wondering if that caution that a lot of people who are conservative are avowing in this particular time, if what the right way to try to solve it is, and the only way I would think that you really have to have individuals, particularly in government, who have a clean slate in terms of ethics. I mean, you can make mistakes at times. You could make a judgment that turns out to be wrong. But apparently, our state and local and even now our federal government are riddled with these schemes that are making money for individuals who are literally robbing the citizens of our country.
Yeah, well, I know we have a break here in a second, Governor Paterson, so I can kind of try to set it up a little bit in terms of my thinking on this, and then also, we can get your thoughts on it once we get past that. Okay. But I think you're right. I think that there has to be changes within the structures of government, and I also think that some of the people that are in these various cases taking advantage, they also need to be looked at. But I can expand on that when we get back.
That's James Flippin. I'm David Paterson. We'll be right back.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. The left versus the right. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
We're back on the left versus the right with James Flippin. And James, I want to go back to something we talked about earlier in the show because it's pretty apparent that we're right in the middle of some very interesting activity. And that is that earlier today, the Russians attacked the Ukraine in the capital. One person was killed. A number of people had to be rescued. And it was a pretty interesting move for Putin to make the day before Vladimir Zelensky is coming to Mar-a-Lago to meet with President Trump. And my thought is, are we in position to do for the Ukraine what we were able to do for Nigeria? Not an easy question, but that's why I asked you.
Yeah, well, it's not. And I think the kind of sad reality, the tough reality is, I think the answer is no. I mean, I think that why Putin did this, and obviously I'm not inside his head, and I don't know what the ministers in Moscow are telling him right now, but I think the reason that you would do something like that is to clearly send a message, right? President Trump did the same thing with taking out ISIS on Christmas night.
Exactly.
It's like, look, there's a reason that we're doing this. It's the violence and the suffering that you're retching upon the Christians. We're striking back on you on Christmas. So for Putin to do this one day before the Zelensky-Trump summit at Mar-a-Lago, it makes you think that there's something to that timing. Unfortunately, right now, in terms of what I'm reading, in terms of what I'm understanding, in terms of what I think the reality has been for quite some time between Ukraine and Russia on that eastern front of Ukraine, the western or southwestern portion of Russia. Russia is holding back from outright annihilation and outright victory, much in the same way that Israel kind of has to do the same thing when going up against Hamas. Obviously, the differences in the motivations and the quality of people on either side, I'm not even trying to get into that. I'm talking about the actual militaristic realities behind what the capabilities are of the Russian Federation versus what the capabilities are of the defense systems in Ukraine. And we already know that so much of that funding from NATO, from the United States, sending weapons, sending bombs, is part of the only reason that Ukraine can step up in the first place. So I think that this is Russia basically saying, look, it's time. We've come up on almost 4 years now of this trench warfare style fighting. It's brutal. It's awful. It's nasty. Without even getting into who's right, who's wrong, any of this stuff, sometimes it just comes down to the reality of the situation on the ground. And could there be a more direct involvement from the U.S. military to potentially continue this conflict or expand it or, maybe protract it or whatever? Yeah, there probably could be. I'm not going to deny that there would be a way for the U.S. military to get involved, but I don't think that's what the American people want. I don't think that's what the right thing is to do. I certainly don't think it's what President Trump plans to do. So I think that unfortunately at this point, you got to make a deal the best you possibly can. What I had heard Governor Paterson's ability of some of these continued sort of security guarantees from America and from the U.S., provided this comes to a head. So that could mean demilitarization of the Donbas region by the Ukraine. It could mean that they don't necessarily have to agree that it's Russian. It might almost be like sort of a demilitarized zone, which is sadly, I think, something we were probably getting to 3 years ago, and it just hasn't happened yet. So I don't know that there's really anything right now that can be done except hopefully make the best possible deal that there could be made. And rather than Putin sort of like throwing a rock at a hornet's nest with what happened today, I think it's sort of like hey, look, this has to happen now, and there's a reason why. But that's just my view.
Well done, Mr. Flippin. I must tell you, you broke off a little bit while you were talking. I thought the Russians had attacked your apartment. But the thought that came to my mind, and I really want to hear what you think about this, is do you think that what the Russians did was not just to kind of send a message, but to answer the message that President Trump sent, even though it was in a different part of the world?
That's a really good point. I think that's probably the kind of insight, and I'm not even trying to gas you up. I think that's probably the kind of insight that comes from having been an executive before. You know what I mean? Like, I think you're probably looking at it from that chess perspective of very rarely do you do something totally just in a vacuum or even just for the one reason. I'm thinking about the news side of it and the fact that this summit is supposed to happen in Mar-a-Lago tomorrow. But the other undeniable part of it is how these kind of sword measuring contests are happening all the time, right? And the rattling of the saber, and then what actually happens, and the whole idea that happened earlier this year between Israel and Iran and the U.S. with that bomb that was sent over Iran and taking out the bunker buster there. So it's a good point. I don't know. I mean, I think that the situation in Nigeria is one that Putin would be sympathetic to the U.S. side with. I know that he's railed against the dangers of Islam and the need to sort of restore the Western way of life and uphold that Western way of life. But that's obviously a lot different than the conflict between Russia and Ukraine, which is much more kind of post-Soviet Civil War stuff almost. So
let's land back here in New York after we've had this trip around the world and talk about things that are going on right here in New York City and New York State. The election for governor will be in 2026. The current governor, Kathy Hochul, seems to be moving around a lot more. She was at the movie the other night, and
she was.
And also from Nassau County, someone I've known for a very long time, Bruce Blakeman, got into the race, and somehow Elise Stefanik got out of the race. And I can't really speculate on why those occurrences, existed that way. But that's where we are. Blakeman and Hochul, way out, 30,000 foot vantage point. How do you see that race going?
Well, it is interesting, the timing of that, how Blakeman just a couple of weeks ago made it official that he was going to get in after having kind of thrown it out there or dangled it for so long. And then several days later, Elise Stefanik decides that she's out. The reporting was, as I'm sure you know, Governor Paterson, that Stefanik really was counting on the endorsement from Trump. And President Trump more or less said, at least publicly, I'm friends with both of them. I think they'd both do a good job. Whether or not she felt like that was just not enough for her early in that primary season.
That's how I would have felt.
She worried. Yeah, and I don't know if it's a personal thing then, or if it's just a calculus along the lines of the politics behind it. And if you're not going to have that big gun in your corner, then maybe it's a losing effort in the primary. I also, and I'm curious to get your insight on this. I guess I'll put it back on you this way. Do you think that there's really a lot of phone calls and meetings and text messages and discussion over whether or not it's the right thing for the party and for the movement? I know all these politicians have their own focus and their own career at hand, and everybody wants to grab the brass ring. But do you think there was ever any level of discussion from like party leaders or people maybe connected to Trump who say, look, this is going to be brutal. This is going to be bruising. This primary season is not going to be easy for either of you to come out of unscathed. Why don't we really do the math right now and try to figure it out? And then maybe they look at it and they say, look, it is going to be really close. It's hard to know which one of us is best, but let's pick somebody. And then Stefanik says, well, you know what? I want to spend more time with my family. I'll take another shot at it. I don't know. Maybe it's naive of me to think that kind of conversation could actually happen, but I did wonder if it could be part of it.
So I'm going to take a guess, James. I'm going to take a guess. It's that Elise Stefanik has represented the people in the northern country very well. And she really did earn, I think, the opportunity to run for governor. However, when it became clear that she was running for governor, I thought that she, when Kathy Hochul went to Washington and sat on in a hearing with some of the congressional representatives, I thought her conduct was inappropriate. This is someone who came to you and you're going to insult them in front of a lot of people and everybody knows you're going to run against them. I thought that was a demerit. Then when she came back to the district in some of her appearances, I thought her voice that always sounded strong and commanding suddenly became shrill. And if that was the case, that might have been what opened the door for Blakeman to maybe even hint to the White House, if I get in the race, do you think you could get her out? Something like that. But I did think that he came across that when he speaks to people and that kind of thing. And of course, he's from Long Island, which is, like a fifth borough of New York City. He can mix it up with anybody. And I think that they might have had a fear that she would falter in a primary against him. And maybe even in a general against Governor Hochul.
Yeah, well, I have to admit that I'm sort of newer to learning as much about Bruce Blakeman. But I'll say this much. The people that talk about him and the way they talk about him, it makes you notice, in essence. Like, everybody says how rock solid he is. You know the success that he's had, obviously, in Nassau County, which, despite the fact that Long Island is a bit more conservative, still, as you just noted, is basically just a kind of part of the metropolitan area. So anybody who has a Republican can make hay, you take notice of that. And I do think that one of the, I hate to put it this way, but like, in other words, I think you really want to draw a juxtaposition against Kathy Hochul. And you really want to present a clear alternative on the GOP side as someone who's a strong executive, somebody who's planning to actually change the way things are being done. Now, it's not to say that Elise Stefanik wouldn't be that. I have every reason to expect that she would do a good job as governor. But there are certain things just on the basic scorecard that I think kind of work against her almost in that respect. Upstate New York, well, so is Kathy Hochul. A woman, a mom, somebody who's going to come from that sort of sensibility as opposed to... So is Kathy
Hochul, like you said.
Right, exactly. That's my point. So like Bruce Blakeman is a guy who's going to come up, say, we need more cops, we need more of this, we need more toughness, this, that, the other thing. I'm not even trying to make it some sort of a sexist thing. I think it's just that Bruce Blakeman is a guy, even just based off the geography of it, kind of draws the distinction. They tried to do it last time with Lee Zeldin. Lee Zeldin came pretty close. I just think that as much as I like Lee Zeldin, I think that Bruce Blakeman, and maybe this is kind of to bring it full circle what you were alluding to, is going to be a little bit more of a force on the campaign trail. And I feel like that's what's really needed right now.
Well,
because you're trying to figure out a way to break the ice almost.
Well said, James. And I'm going to answer it right after we come back from these commercials, because if we don't do it, neither you nor I will ever be heard on this station again.
The left versus the right on the Red Apple Podcast Network. Versus the right. Entertaining and informative on the Red Apple Podcast Network.
Welcome back to the left versus the right. I don't think that Mr. Flippin and I have too many issues that we're at odds about, but I think that was a very good explanation, Bruce, of what could happen in the gubernatorial race. And I think that what you said that really rang true is that Stefanik was from the same area that the governor is. And Stefanik is a woman just like the governor. Stefanik is a mother just like the governor. And for her to break away, I would think she would really have to, kindle up some strength from other parts of the state. And I don't think it always works when you are coming at people the way she does. It works for the president. Nobody knows why, but it does work for him. But I can't say for some of those who very much support him and try to emulate him that always works.
Yeah. Well, you know what, Governor Paterson, I think we're both sports fans, so we understand this kind of thing. It's sort of the truth behind how you can't always play the game the way your opponent plays it. You can't always just decide, we're going to run the ball down this team's throat. Well, they have a really good run defense, and our running backs aren't that strong, and our O-line's not that. Oh, well, if it was basketball, we're going to play above the rim against this team. Well, you know what? They've really got some front court protectors, and you might actually be better taking some jump shots against this particular team. So President Trump plays the game the way he plays it. I think it was last week on this show that we kind of got into the social media aspect of Rob Reiner having passed, and then the tweet that was sent, and I admitted it kind of hurt my feelings. It's not the way I would do it, but it's the way that he does it. So yeah, Elise Stefanik, and potentially in the halls of Congress, being a total bulldog fighter pit bull is gonna get you what you need to do. And I think you've alluded to the fact that it's a balance there. You need to have your friendships, but you also need to have your positions that you stand strong on.
Speaking of
go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead. I just think that in essence, you're talking about the need to win a tough election, right? The in-state blue advantage for Democrats is very clear in New York. And even just the concept, I know it was Todd Shapiro who was on with us with Sid and Friends, where he said maybe even just getting Long Island and getting that voter turnout in is a big part of it. So
absolutely.
There's a lot to the politics that I don't even necessarily understand, but I do like to watch it and observe.
And there are a lot of Democrats in Long Island who like Blakeman. I used to live out there, so I know that. So now the big question of the day, James, naming the Kennedy Center after himself. Take it from there.
Well, Governor Paterson, I think that you've said it well in the past, where you've explained how you've had times where you bumped into President Trump, and maybe it was even when he was not yet president and just a famous New York businessman, and kind of the ways that you've interacted with him. And he's got a unique style, and he's got a style that in very interesting fashion, can remain at the front end of the news cycle, even though it's changed so much. The news cycle is so different from the way it used to be even 10 years ago. And President Trump has kind of mastered the ability to stay at the front end of it, often because he's so good at needling people. Other people might use the term trolling. Sometimes people think about like the pro wrestling aspect of it, where the heel is sometimes almost the most popular one because people just love to hate that guy. So with the Trump Kennedy Center, and it kind of makes me giggle just saying it out loud, I think that that's clearly a way for him to try to get under the skin of certain people, because you can rest assured, bet your bottom dollar that the next president and the next administration that comes through, it's probably going to go back to being the Kennedy Center. If the president's got a D next to their name, it's definitely going back to being the Kennedy Center.
Well, it certainly, you just have to say that he creates all kinds of discussion possibilities, and he's shown no sign of tiring, even in what is now his second term. I mean, he's really, he's unpredictable.
Very much so. Very much so. And I think that that's what makes him such a tough opponent. We talked about the whole aspect of, can Elise Stefanik play the same strategy in order to win New York? Maybe not. Can someone of a certain age or demographic or whatever play the game the same way? Maybe not. There's also just the inherent charisma and comedy that kind of comes with the way President Trump is. I mean, he's hilarious most of the time, and I understand that people don't see it that way because they so emotionally respond to what it is that he's doing. But he's actually got a very funny way of delivering a lot of that stuff.
Oh, and he's a showman.
That's something that works to his advantage, obviously.
P.T. Barnum is probably the last person who was as good a showman as he is. And he takes, exactly. He takes complete advantage of it. And, at times I can virulently disagree with him about something, but he'll say something in defense of what he's saying that cracks me up, and I can't help it.
We all have, Governor Paterson, I think we all have people in our lives that kind of fit that to an extent, whether it's a friend of ours or somebody we work with. We end up kind of saying like, man, you're crazy, or you're a son of a gun, depending on what term you use, whatever. But you like that person because they have a way of kind of making their point, and you saying, I don't agree with you, but I still like to hear you make your point or whatever. And definitely President Trump can fall into that category. One thing I did just want to circle back on, Governor, because you had said, and it was a really good point, you need to change the people in government, right? And President Trump is a guy who famously was not a politician for decades, most of his life, until he was. And I just think that, and no offense intended to anybody who has spent the majority of their career in government or continues to do so to this day, I just think that careers in government are a bad thing most of the time, inherently bad, because you have what you're talking about. You have this whole idea of, I'm going to keep my career going. I'm going to keep the system going rather than trying to focus on the results. And you also have the need on the other side to worry about who the immigrants are that could potentially take advantage of this great country that we have. Or we need merit-based things. We need merit-based politicians. We need merit-based immigration. For immigrants that come in, asylum is one thing, wars and famine and disease, and even on disease, you got to be careful, but those are all kind of different. I'm talking about, we should be saying, when you're going to come to this country, do you have the money to do it? Do you have the skills? Do you plan to be a cultural American who wants to uphold the values of the West? Because it's our house. It's our country. We don't need to just fling the door open. You don't need to just try to heat the whole neighborhood when it's snowy and icy by throwing your front door open. That would be stupid, first of all. Two, it's not your job. So I think that in the overarching way, we're talking a lot about, politics and who's running for office, who should run for office, who should be in government. You also have to say we need to be vigilant and stewards of the government, of the people that are in it, but also of the culture that drives American way of life and drives the Western way of life. And that's something that you and I think, often find that common ground on. We like to joke, oh, left versus right, and this is we find a way to find the center or whatever. But that's kind of the point, is that at the very least, you want to believe that it's worthwhile having a country, having a home, like successful stewardship of whatever your lot is. That's actually a good thing.
Well, as we speak, James, there is a company that is owed money by the city. The city acknowledges that they owe the company that money. And somehow, here we are almost at the end of this administration, going to the next administration. They haven't made a move to pay the money, even though the payment was approved by the controller's office, namely Brad Lander. And all of this comes down to one employee who apparently has been around since Methuselah, who has been in City Hall and always seems to be able to steer issues, to this person's point of view. And so what you were describing in government, in a sense, term limits for government staff, I agree with you.
Yeah. And also just in a big picture sense, and whatever, this is maybe getting into the nitty gritty, but the years that I've spent as a reporter in New York, and anytime I would go to any of these comptroller events, Governor Paterson, it would always be about, I don't know, like getting free Metro cards for members of this particular immigrant community or something like that. And I'd be sitting there scratching my head thinking, like, aren't you the accountant? Like, why are you involved in all this kind of stuff? Like, aren't you the bean counter? Like, aren't you supposed to be like putting the spreadsheets together at the end of the year and saying we're running a deficit or we're running a surplus? Or I thought that's what this was all about. Also, I'd like to just say that I owe you a Coke because you capitalized on our bet and you were able to include Methuselah in today's program. So that was very, very impressive.
Very good.
That you were able to do that.
Well, James, thanks so much for joining me. I'm sure we'll be back together sometime soon here on WABC. Yes. We're going to step aside and let John Sterling take over. He's my all-time favorite.
Merry Christmas, everybody. And actually, Governor Paterson, I had to talk everybody off the ledge at this Christmas party I was at on Christmas Eve because all the Mets fans, they were just losing it. And I said, come on, it's a long off season and we got a way to go until we get to April. So just take a deep breath.
If I was at that party, I would have been on the ledge right there with him. Thanks so much, James.
I know you would.
Thank you all for listening to WABC 77. I'm David Paterson. It's been a pleasure, James and I, to talk to you for the last hour. Please have a great weekend.
Thanks for listening to The Left versus the Right. You can hear The Left versus the Right Saturday afternoons at 4. If you like the podcast, share it with your friends and listen anytime at WABCRadio.com and download the WABC Radio app. Hit that subscribe button on all major podcast platforms. Plus, follow WABC on social on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, and X. See you next time for a new episode so you never have to wonder.
What the heck is going on here?
Every week, the Payne family cuts straight to the real financial story.
The one question, Bob, everyone's asking is, are we in an artificial intelligence bubble? You've been through boom and bust. What do you think?
No hype, no myths. Just what actually matters to your money.
Does feel very similar to what we experienced in the 90s. Where are we, though? Are we in 1995, 1997, 1999?
Listen to the Pain Points of Wealth on the Red Apple Podcast Network.